I still remember the cold expression on his face when he signed my termination papers. He thought he'd just eliminated a burden. He had no idea that in just a few days he'd be on his knees before the contract I'd kept hidden for 10 years. My name is Elena Scott, and this is the story of how I took back what was rightfully mine. The conference room on the 40th floor of Orion Systems headquarters had always intimidated visitors with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle. But on that particular Tuesday morning I felt nothing as I sat across from Patrick Gaines, our CEO, and Victor Hale, the COO. The mahogany table between us might as well have been a chasm. "Elena, I'm sure you understand this isn't personal," Patrick said, adjusting his Italian silk tie. The gesture was meant to convey authority, but I'd seen him do it too many times when he was nervous. "The board has decided on a comprehensive restructuring. Your position as head of R&D is being eliminated." I kept my expression neutral, watching as Victor slid a folder across the table, the severance package, standard 2 weeks pay, continuation of health benefits for 30 days. They were offering me scraps after everything I'd done for this company. "The NeuroWar project will be reassigned to the new Integrated Tech Division," Victor added, his voice carrying that particular tone of manufactured sympathy. "We appreciate your contributions, but the company needs fresh perspectives moving forward." Fresh perspectives, I almost laughed. They had no idea what they were throwing away. I stood without opening the folder. "I'll need the rest of the day to clear out my office." Patrick's eyebrows rose slightly. He'd expected anger, perhaps tears. Certainly not this calm acceptance. "Of course. Security will escort you." As I walked out of that conference room, my heels clicking against the marble floor, I allowed myself a small smile. They thought they were eliminating a problem. In reality, they just started a countdown to their own destruction. The security guard who accompanied me to my office was Jim, a decent man who'd worked at Orion for 15 years. He looked uncomfortable as I packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box, awards, photographs, a small cactus my daughter had given me. I left the technical manuals and project files. They'd need those, though they wouldn't understand half of what was in them. "I'm sorry about this, Dr. Scott," Jim said quietly as we waited for the elevator. "Doesn't seem right after everything you've done." I patted his shoulder. "Don't worry about me, Jim. Sometimes endings are really beginnings in disguise." The drive home to Bellevue took 40 minutes in traffic. I used the time to think, to plan. My house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, a modest 2-story I'd bought before Orion's stock options had made me wealthy, on paper. Paper wealth that had evaporated with my termination. I went straight to my home office, to the safe hidden behind a false panel in the bookshelf. The combination was my daughter's birthday, backwards. Inside lay the documents that would change everything, the original NeuroWar patents, the licensing agreements, and most importantly, the contract I'd signed with Donald Pierce, Orion's former CEO, 10 years ago. I spread the papers across my desk and began to read. Though I knew every word by heart, the licensing agreement was clear. Orion Systems had exclusive rights to use the NeuroWar technology for military and defense applications. But that license was contingent on annual renewal. The renewal date was in 5 days. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Webb, a friend in Orion's IT department. "Heard what happened. Coffee tomorrow? There's something you should know." I agreed to meet him, then returned to the documents. The more I studied them, the more I realized Patrick and Victor had made a catastrophic mistake. They'd assumed the NeuroWar technology belonged to Orion Systems. They'd never bothered to check who actually owned the patents. That night, I couldn't sleep, not from worry, but from anticipation. I kept thinking about how it had all started. How I'd saved Orion from bankruptcy only to be discarded like obsolete hardware. 10 years ago, Orion Systems had been on the brink of collapse. The company had lost 3 major defense contracts in a row, victims of their own complacency and inability to innovate. Stock prices had plummeted from $127 per share to under $8. Layoffs were happening weekly. The board was in panic mode. I was just a senior engineer then, working in a cramped lab in the basement of the old Orion building. But I had an idea, a revolutionary approach to AI-controlled drone systems that could operate with unprecedented precision, even in GPS-denied environments. The NeuroWar concept. For 4 weeks, I basically lived in that lab. My daughter Sophie, only 8 at the time, would do her homework at a spare desk while I worked through equations and prototypes. The janitor, Mrs. Chen, would bring us sandwiches because she knew I'd forget to eat otherwise. I pushed myself beyond exhaustion, driven by a vision of what this technology could become. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on a Thursday. I'd finally cracked the algorithm that would allow the AI to interpret environmental data in real time, creating its own navigation parameters without external input. It was elegant, revolutionary, and exactly what the defense industry needed. Donald Pierce, then CEO, had been the only executive who still came to the labs. He was old school, believed in understanding the technology his company produced. When I showed him the initial NeuroWar prototype, his eyes lit up like a child's on Christmas morning. "This could save us," he'd said, watching the test drone navigate a complex obstacle course with perfect precision. "Elena, this is extraordinary." But Donald was also shrewd. He knew the board was looking for any opportunity to sell off assets, to strip the company for parts. He pulled me aside after that demonstration. "I want you to file the patents under your own name," he said. "Create a licensing agreement with Orion. That way, if the vultures circle, they can't take this technology and sell it off. You'll maintain control." I'd protested initially. It felt wrong somehow. But Donald insisted. "You created this. You should own it. The company will benefit from using it, but you need to protect your invention. Trust me on this." So I did. I filed the patents under my name with my personal attorney. The licensing agreement gave Orion exclusive use for defense applications, with an annual renewal clause. Donald had the company lawyers draw it up, making sure it was ironclad. At the time, I thought he was just being protective of the technology. Now I realized he'd been protecting me. NeuroWar had indeed saved Orion Systems. Within 6 months of implementation, we'd secured 4 major contracts with the Department of Defense. Stock prices soared back to $90 per share. The board hailed it as a miraculous turnaround. Patrick Gaines, then ambitious VP of Operations, had used the success to position himself as Donald's successor. When Donald retired 2 years later, victim of a mild stroke and pressure from the board, Patrick took over as CEO. One of his first acts was to promote Victor Hale, his golf buddy from Stanford, to COO. Together they transformed Orion from a technology company into what they called a market-driven enterprise. Translation: they cared more about quarterly earnings than innovation. I met Marcus at a small cafe in Redmond the next morning. He looked nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder as if expecting corporate spies. "They're planning to modify NeuroWar," he said without preamble. "Patrick has a team working on removing what he calls legacy code restrictions. He wants your name completely eliminated from the system architecture." I sipped my coffee calmly. "That's illegal. They'd be violating the licensing agreement." Marcus leaned forward. "That's just it. I don't think they know about the licensing agreement. I overheard Patrick telling Victor that once they clean up the code, they can file new patents and cut you out completely. Do you have proof?" He slid a USB drive across the table. "Email threads. Recorded conversations from the conference room AV system. It's all there. Elena, they're planning to steal your work." I pocketed the drive. "Thank you, Marcus. This is very helpful. What are you going to do? What I should have done years ago, I replied. Protect what's mine. That afternoon, I called Rachel Meyer. Rachel and I had met at a Women in Technology conference 5 years ago. She'd since become one of the most feared intellectual property attorneys in the Pacific Northwest. When I explained the situation, she cleared her schedule immediately. We met at her office in downtown Seattle, a sleek space that screamed success and intimidation in equal measure. Rachel listened as I laid out the documents, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. This is remarkable, she said finally. They've built a $150 million annual revenue stream on technology they don't actually own. And the license expires in 4 days. 3 days and 18 hours, to be exact. Rachel's smile was predatory. Elena, they're completely exposed. If you don't renew the license, they can't legally use NeuroWar. Every drone, every system running that software becomes a liability. Their defense contracts would be in breach. I know. What do you want to do? I thought about Patrick's cold dismissal, about Victor's fake sympathy, about 10 years of watching them take credit for my work while pushing me aside. I want them to understand what they've thrown away. We spent the next 3 hours crafting a legal notice. It was a masterpiece of professional language that essentially said, "You're screwed, and it's your own fault." The notice informed Orion Systems that the NeuroWar licensing agreement would not be automatically renewed, and any continued use of the technology after the expiration date would result in immediate legal action. Rachel sent the notice to Orion's legal department, copying the board of directors and major shareholders. Then we waited. The response came faster than expected. Within 2 hours, Orion's chief legal counsel, Harrison Wade, was calling Rachel's office. She put him on speaker. "This is obviously a misunderstanding," Harrison said, his usually smooth voice tight with stress. "The NeuroWar technology was developed as work for hire. It belongs to Orion Systems. Do you have documentation supporting that claim?" Rachel asked innocently. "It was developed in our labs, using our resources, by our employee." My client was indeed an employee. However, the patent filings, which predate the licensing agreement by 2 weeks, clearly show Dr. Scott as the sole inventor and owner. The licensing agreement signed by Donald Pierce on behalf of Orion Systems acknowledges her ownership. "Would you like me to send you copies?" The silence on the other end was deafening. "This is extortion," Harrison finally said. "This is contract law," Rachel corrected. "My client is under no obligation to renew the license. If Orion wishes to continue using NeuroWar technology, they'll need to negotiate new terms. I'll need to consult with the board. You have 72 hours. After Harrison hung up, Rachel turned to me. "They're panicking." Good. That evening my phone rang constantly. Unknown numbers, which I ignored, then a familiar one, Donald Pierce. I answered on the second ring. "Elena." His voice was older, more fragile than I remembered. "I heard what happened. I'm sorry. You warned me this day might come. I'd hoped the company would be smarter. Patrick called me. Wanted me to convince you to be reasonable. I told him to go to hell." I smiled. "Thank you, Donald. That technology is yours. You saved the company with it. Don't let them steal it from you." "I won't." "Good. And Elena, don't settle for less than you're worth." The next morning brought new developments. Liam Grant, a young engineer I'd mentored, reached out through encrypted message. He was still working at Orion, part of the team Patrick had assigned to modify NeuroWar. "Dr. Scott, you need to hear this," his message read. He'd attached an audio file. I played it through headphones. Patrick's voice was clear. "I don't care what the legal issues are. We need that code cleaned and resubmitted to the patent office by end of week. Elena Scott's name comes off everything. If anyone asks, she was just following specifications we provided. The real innovation came from our integration team. Victor's voice followed. What about the documentation trail? It can handle that. We'll show that the core concepts came from our strategic planning sessions. She was just the impulse. I saved the file in multiple locations, then forwarded it to Rachel with a simple note, add fraud to the list. Rachel called immediately. This is a gift. They're conspiring to commit intellectual property theft and fraud. We can destroy them with this. I don't want to destroy the company, I said. Just the men who thought they could steal from me. Even better. We use this to fracture their support. The board won't stand behind executives planning to commit fraud. By day 3, Orion Systems was in crisis mode. I heard from Marcus that emergency board meetings were being called hourly. The legal department was in overdrive trying to find loopholes in the licensing agreement. The stock price had started to dip as rumors of a major IP dispute leaked to the market. Patrick finally called me directly that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. Elena, this is Patrick. I think we've had a misunderstanding. I'd like to meet and discuss this situation professionally. Call me back. I didn't. Instead, I met with Rachel to plan our next move. She'd been contacted by 3 board members independently, each wanting to understand the situation better. The recorded conversation of Patrick and Victor planning fraud had been strategically leaked to select members of the board, causing exactly the rift we'd hoped for. Harrison Wade wants to meet, Rachel informed me. He's hinting at a settlement offer. Tell him we'll meet tomorrow. One day before the license expires. That night I worked on my terms, not just what I wanted, but what would be fair. The technology was mine, but I developed it with Orion's resources. They'd commercialized it successfully. There was value in maintaining the relationship, but only on my terms. The meeting took place in Rachel's conference room. Harrison Wade arrived with 2 other lawyers, and surprisingly, Margaret Walsh, the chairman of Orion's board. Patrick and Victor were notably absent. Dr. Scott, Margaret began, her steel gray hair and sharp suit giving her an air of authority. We seem to have a situation that could damage both parties. I'm here to find a resolution. There's no situation, I replied calmly. The license expires tomorrow. Orion needs to decide if they want to renew it. Under what terms? I slid a document across the table. The annual licensing fee increases from $2 million to $20 million. I retain approval rights over any modifications to the core technology. My name remains on all documentation as the inventor. And I want a seat on the technical advisory board. Harrison started to object, but Margaret silenced him with a gesture. She read through the terms carefully. This is a significant increase. NeuroOr generates over $150 million in annual revenue for Orion. $20 million is a fair licensing fee. Alternatively, you can try to develop competing technology. I estimate that would take 3 to 4 years and cost around $200 million, assuming you could find engineers capable of understanding the underlying architecture. And if we refuse? Rachel spoke up. Then at midnight tomorrow, Orion Systems loses the right to use NeuroOr technology. Every system running it becomes a legal liability. Your defense contracts would be in breach. Margaret's expression didn't change, but I saw her fingers tighten on the document. What about Patrick and Victor's plans to modify the technology? So she knew about that. Good. Any modifications made without my approval would violate the existing license. I'd be forced to take legal action. I need to discuss this with the board. You have 24 hours. As they filed out, Margaret lingered. You know, Donald Pierce spoke very highly of you. He said you were the smartest engineer he'd ever worked with. Donald understood the value of innovation. Yes, he did. Patrick has different priorities. The way she said it told me everything I needed to know about the board's opinion of their CEO. The next 24 hours were intense. My phone rang constantly with updates from Rachel. The board was in emergency session. Patrick was fighting the new terms, claiming they were being extorted. Victor was trying to convince the engineering team to rush through the modifications before the deadline. Then catastrophe struck Orion. In their haste to modify the code, Victor's team introduced a critical error into the production system. A demonstration for a major client went disastrously wrong when the drones lost synchronization and crashed into each other. The footage, captured by multiple attendees, went viral within the defense industry. Orion's stock price plummeted 15% in after-hours trading. The client withdrew their tentative contract worth $40 million. The board was beyond panic. They were furious. At 6 p.m., 6 hours before the license expired, Margaret Walsh called Rachel directly. "We need to meet. Now." This time the meeting included most of Orion's board of directors. Patrick and Victor were present but seated at the far end of the table, their usual swagger completely absent. Margaret didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Dr. Scott, we're prepared to accept your terms, with one modification. We want a 3-year locked-in rate on the licensing fee." "No modifications," I said firmly. "The terms are non-negotiable." Patrick couldn't contain himself any longer. "This is ridiculous. She's holding the company hostage over technology we helped develop." I turned to face him directly. "You're right, Patrick. You did help develop it. You helped by creating a culture where innovation was valued less than stock prices. You helped by promoting based on golf handicaps rather than technical merit. You helped by firing the person who actually understood how the technology worked. You were redundant." I was inconvenient, I corrected. "I asked uncomfortable questions about your modification plans. I insisted on quality over speed. I reminded you that the technology you were selling had limitations you didn't want clients to know about." Victor tried to interject. "The modifications would have improved. The modifications would have introduced 17 critical vulnerabilities into the system," I said, pulling out a technical analysis I'd prepared. "Your team doesn't understand the quantum entanglement protocols that make NeuroOR work. They were about to turn our most secure system into Swiss cheese." The board members were looking at Patrick and Victor with expressions ranging from disappointment to fury. Margaret's voice was ice cold when she spoke. "Gentlemen, I think you should wait outside while we conclude this negotiation." Patrick's face turned red. "You can't." "I can. And I will," Margaret cut him off. "Security will escort you out." After they left, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Margaret looked tired but determined. "Dr. Scott, I apologize for how you've been treated. It's clear that our current leadership doesn't understand the value of what you've created. We accept your terms." But I wasn't done. "There's one more thing. I want a full investigation into the attempt to fraudulently modify the patents. The board needs to know exactly what Patrick and Victor were planning." Several board members nodded. One of them, James Chen, spoke up. "That investigation is already underway. We take intellectual property theft very seriously, especially when it's attempted by our own executives." The contracts were signed at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the original license expired. I now had control over my technology again, plus a revenue stream that reflected its true value. But more importantly, I'd exposed the rot at the heart of Orion Systems. As we were leaving, Margaret pulled me aside. "The board will be making some leadership changes soon. Would you consider returning to Orion in a senior capacity?" "No," I said without hesitation. I'll honor our licensing agreement and provide technical consultation as specified, but I'll never be an employee again. I've learned the value of independence. She nodded, understanding. For what it's worth, Donald would be proud of how you handled this. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within a week, both Patrick and Victor were placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. When the full scope of their plan to steal the NeuroCore technology came to light, including emails discussing how to backdate documents and falsify development records, they were terminated for cause, losing all their unvested stock options and bonuses. The tech press had a field day with the story. CEO attempts to steal company's core technology gets caught, read one headline. Orion stock took another hit, but the announcement of my continued involvement with NeuroWar helped stabilize it. I established my own consulting firm, Scott Innovations, with NeuroWar as the flagship product. While Orion remained my primary client, I began developing variations for civilian applications, search and rescue, agricultural monitoring, disaster response. The technology I'd created to guide military drones could also save lives and feed people. Marcus, who'd risked his job to warn me, became my first hire as Chief Technology Officer. Liam Grant joined us a month later, bringing 3 other talented engineers who were tired of Orion's toxic culture. We set up shop in a converted warehouse in Fremont, with actual windows and a policy that innovation mattered more than dress codes. Rachel called me one afternoon, 6 months after the confrontation. Thought you'd want to know, Patrick's been indicted for conspiracy to commit intellectual property theft. Victor pled guilty to a lesser charge and got probation. I don't take any joy in that, I said honestly. They did it to themselves. True. By the way, Orion's new CEO wants to meet with you. Margaret Walsh stepped down from the board to take the position herself. I wasn't surprised. Margaret had the technical background and the integrity to fix what Patrick had broken. Tell her I'm happy to meet as a fellow CEO. The meeting with Margaret was cordial and productive. She'd cleaned house at Orion, replacing most of the senior leadership with people who actually understood technology. She also wanted to expand our licensing agreement to cover new applications. I've reviewed your civilian use cases, she said over coffee. We'd like to partner on the search and rescue applications. The military connections could help with disaster response deployment. I'm listening. We negotiated for 2 hours, finding common ground that benefited both companies. As we were wrapping up, Margaret made an observation. You know, Patrick never understood what really drove innovation. He thought it was about control, about owning everything. What do you think drives it? Respect, she said simply. Respecting the people who create, the process of creation, and the creation itself. Donald knew that. You know that. Patrick never learned it. A year later, Scott Innovations had grown to 50 employees and was valued at over $300 million. We'd saved 43 lives with our search and rescue drones, helped farmers increase crop yields by 20% with our agricultural monitoring systems, and were working with the UN on disaster response protocols. I kept a photo on my desk from the old days at Orion, me in that cramped basement lab, Sophie doing homework beside me, Mrs. Chen's sandwich wrapper visible in the corner. It reminded me of where I'd come from and why I'd fought so hard to protect what I'd created. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I found Jim the security guard waiting by my car. He'd been laid off from Orion during another restructuring after Patrick's departure. Dr. Scott, he said nervously, I hope you don't mind me coming here. I just wanted to thank you. Thank me? For what? For standing up to them. For showing that creating something meaningful matters more than playing politics. My daughter's studying engineering now because of what you did. She says she wants to invent something that helps people, like you did. I smiled, feeling a warmth that no stock price or licensing fee could match. Tell her the world needs more inventors who care about helping people. And Jim, we're hiring security personnel. Interested? His face lit up. Really? Really? But fair warning, we're pretty boring compared to Orion. No executive drama, no backstabbing, just people working on interesting problems. Sounds perfect. As I drove home that night, I thought about Patrick and Victor, about their belief that power came from taking credit for others' work. They'd never understood that true power came from creation, from building something that mattered, from protecting what you'd built not out of greed but out of respect for the innovation itself. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie, now 18 and studying computer science at UW. Mom, saw the news about Scott Innovation's new water purification drone. You're basically saving the world now. Just trying to make it a little better, I texted back. Donald Pierce would be proud, she replied. I smiled. Yes, he would be. The man who'd insisted I protect my invention had been right all along, not because the money mattered, though financial security was nice, but because protecting innovation meant protecting the ability to keep innovating, to keep pushing boundaries, to keep solving problems that mattered. The next morning brought a new challenge, a technical problem with the agricultural drones that had my entire team stumped. I rolled up my sleeves and dove into the code, feeling that familiar thrill of hunting down an elusive bug. I think I found it, Liam called out after 3 hours of debugging. The soil sensors are interfering with the navigation array in high mineral environments. Can we shield them? I asked. Maybe, but it would add weight. What if we frequency hop instead? And just like that, we were deep in problem-solving mode. Ideas flying back and forth, building on each other's insights. This was what Patrick had never understood. Innovation wasn't a top-down process you could control with org charts and efficiency metrics. It was messy, collaborative, often frustrating, and absolutely thrilling when it worked. By the end of the day, we'd not only solved the problem but developed a new approach to sensor integration that would improve all our drone models. I filed the provisional patent that evening, with the entire team listed as co-inventors. They'd earned it. Rachel called as I was packing up. Elena, you're not going to believe this. I just got a call from Patrick's lawyer. What does he want now? He's starting his own company. Wants to license NeuroOr technology. I laughed, actually laughed out loud. The man who tried to steal it now wants to pay for it. Apparently he's learned his lesson. What should I tell him? I thought about it for a moment. Tell him no. Some bridges, once burned, don't get rebuilt. Besides, I doubt he'd respect the technology any more now than he did then. Fair enough. Oh, and Margaret sends her regards. Orion's stock is up 40% since she took over. She credits the stable NeuroOr licensing relationship as a key factor. She's done good work rebuilding the culture there. Speaking of culture, when are you going to stop working 18-hour days? When the problems stop being interesting, I replied. So never. Probably never. After we hung up, I took a moment to look around the lab. It was bigger than my old basement workspace at Orion, filled with state-of-the-art equipment and brilliant minds working on problems that mattered. But the spirit was the same, that drive to create, to solve, to build something better. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Marcus stood there with a tablet in hand. Elena, you need to see this. The DoD just released their annual innovation report. NeuroOr is listed as one of the top 10 technologies revolutionizing defense capabilities. That's nice, I said, already turning back to my computer. Nice? Elena, this is huge. We should put out a press release. Maybe, I interrupted gently. Do you know what matters more than being on a top 10 list? He shook his head. The fact that our search and rescue variant found those hikers in Colorado last week. The fact that our agricultural drones are helping subsistence farmers in Kenya increase their yields. The fact that right now, Liam's team is probably going to crack the water purification challenge and help provide clean water to thousands of people. Marcus smiled. You're right. But still, the recognition is nice. Recognition is nice, I agreed. But it's not why we do this. As Marcus left, I turned back to my work. There was a new problem to solve, a new challenge to meet, a new way to make the technology I'd created serve humanity better. Patrick had thought that firing me would eliminate a problem. Instead, he'd set me free to solve problems that actually mattered. My computer pinged with a new email. It was from a young engineer at a startup in India asking technical questions about drone navigation in monsoon conditions. I started typing a response, sharing insights that had taken me years to develop, because that's what real innovation was about. Not hoarding knowledge, but sharing it. Not controlling creation, but enabling it. The patent documents for NeuroWar sat in a frame on my wall, a reminder of a battle won. But they weren't what I was proudest of. That honor went to the letters from farmers whose crops had been saved, from rescue workers who'd found lost hikers, from researchers using our technology to monitor endangered species. Patrick Gaines had let me go, thinking I was expendable. He'd been right about one thing: I was never meant to be trapped in Orion's corporate structure, fighting for recognition while my innovations were credited to others. My termination hadn't been an ending. It had been a liberation. As the Seattle sun set over Elliott Bay, casting golden light through the lab windows, I smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new ways to push the boundaries of what was possible. And I'd meet them on my own terms, with my name on my work and my values intact. The message notification on my phone showed another text from Sophie. Mom, my professor wants to know if you're hiring interns. I might have talked you up a bit in class. Send them over, I replied. We always have room for people who want to build something meaningful. Because that's what it had always been about, not the money, not the recognition, not the power plays and corporate politics. It was about the pure joy of creation, the satisfaction of solving problems that mattered, and the knowledge that what you built could make the world a little better. Patrick had thought he was eliminating a costly employee. Instead, he'd created a competitor who understood something he never had. True innovation couldn't be controlled, only nurtured. It couldn't be stolen, only earned. And it couldn't be eliminated by a signature on a termination paper. It could only be set free.